The golden age of piracy was in the 17th and the early 18th century. And during this time, there was more than 5,000 pirates said to be at sea. So it was a problem. It was a big problem. And governments were against it, but governments were also part of it. Maybe you've heard the phrase privateering. Privateering is basically state-sponsored piracy. Be that as it may, I know we didn't come here to talk about pirates, but when the British executed a pirate, they wanted it to be as dramatic and public as possible. So they would parade the pirates, you captured pirates, they would parade them through London, across London Bridge, past the Tower of London to the execution dock. Okay? After hanging the pirates, they would leave the body hanging for at least what they said 3 tides before burying it in an unmarked grave. They wanted the public to see, but they also wanted crews that were passing by on boats to see the penalty for perjury. So there was a reason why they wanted it to be dramatic and they wanted it to be public. They really wanted the hangings to somehow help at least stop piracy. Okay, now, to Jesus, long before the British were hanging pirates, the Romans were perfecting the art of crucifixion. The Romans were very good at bringing theatrical elements to public executions, okay? Very similar. They used mock triumph, which we see where the soldiers are saying, hail King Jesus, hail to you. And they put a purple robe on him and jammed a crown of thorns down on his head. They're mocking him, but they're mocking his triumph. It's just one of the ways they did to make this more theatrical and I guess fun for them, the soldiers. But they also tried to prolong the suffering. And this wasn't just to punish the victim, but it was meant to serve as a warning and a deterrent. So they can just kill people if they just want to kill people, but they didn't. They wanted to make them suffer. They wanted it to last as long as possible. How do we kill you, but slowly? It's cruel. And they too paraded the victim to the crucifixion with a placard announcing the crime. And then they would crucify him by a well-traveled road so that all could see. Josephus, who was a first century Roman Jewish historian, writes this: Titus hoped that the spectacle might perhaps induce the Jews to surrender, for fear that continued resistance might involve them in a similar fate. The soldiers, out of rage and hatred, amused themselves by nailing their prisoners in different postures. And so great was the number that space couldn't be found for the crosses, nor crosses for the bodies. That's a first century historian writing about this phenomena, if you want to call it that. So, when we look at the crucifixion of Jesus, let's put it in the context of his reality, of what it really was. You can't sanitize it. It was not sanitized. It was horrible, and it was meant to be horrible. They worked at it. And I'm sure they talked among themselves, what could we do to make it more mocking, more humiliating? How could we keep them alive longer so we could torture them? It's sad. It's very sad, particularly when you think that this is what Jesus had to face. So I'm going to start in verse 21. I'm going to read some of this. I'm not going to read all of it. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it, and they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. Now, let's talk about some of this. It was normal for the criminal to carry the cross beam. Okay, that the beam that goes horizontal, while the vertical beam was already in the ground. So they would make him carry that. He would also have the placard on him saying what his crime was, and then he would have to carry that. Now, Jesus, after the flogging, is to the brink of exhaustion. Okay? He is out of strength, and there comes a point where he cannot carry the cross. That is how far they have already tortured him. That is how hard they have already been on him, that he physically cannot do it. And you may remember others, talk about him falling, that he's trying to do what they're trying to force him to do, but he can't. Now, don't misunderstand me. What I want to say here is that during CrossFit workouts, I often think of this. Okay. In no way am I trying to compare myself to what Jesus did, but it's just that, sometimes we do pretty intense workouts, and there's been more than once where, there's 10 seconds left in the time that I have to do this and see how much I can do. And somebody will say, hey, there's 10 seconds left, get another one, do one more. And I can't. And it's not the same, but it makes me think. I think of Jesus when they said to him, come on, get up, carry your cross. And he's like, I can't. And he literally could not. So they grabbed Simon, and they mentioned Rufus and Alexander, his children. And why? Why do they mention all these? I believe, and scholars tend to believe, it's probably because Simon and Rufus and Alexander were known to the readers that Mark was writing to, which means they probably became Christians. They probably saw this and somehow got drawn into the story, okay? And I think his sympathy would have absolutely been with Jesus, and he would have been able to see the goodness of this man and the horror of what was being done to him. And he eventually believed that he was the Son of God and became a follower of his. And I think that's why they're named. So in verse 23, it talks about they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he didn't take it. This was not out of compassion. Okay. They're not like, here, Jesus, have a little drink, let's don't be too mean. Let's try to be nice. No, not at all. The point to offering him this is to try to invigorate Jesus so that this can last longer.